Good evening. I'm Linda Frum, and I'm so excited that tonight I'm going to become chair of UJA Federation Board of Directors. We're really sad we can't have our annual general meeting in person, but Adam Minsky, our president and CEO, and I thought that at least we could have a socially distanced chat remotely online as part of this evening's events. And so we're going to be talking about some of the big questions facing us, but I should tell you that where we are right now is in the brand new Poslan's Theater in the Louis and Charlotte Steinberg Cultural Pavilion, which is in the gorgeous new Chef Building, part of the expanded Prosserman JCC on the Sherman campus. And this new facility is just mind-blowing. And when we all do get the chance to come and be here together and celebrate the opening, it's really going to be a fantastic day, because this is just a spectacular, spectacular building. So kudos, Adam, to you and the whole team who put this together.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it really was a collective effort. There are so many volunteers who've been at the heart of getting this done. This facility is spectacular, and we can't wait to welcome everybody to it. And I have to say, I am a little bit intimidated by this chat, only because I grew up listening to your mom on the radio. She was such an incredible interviewer. So the idea of being interviewed by someone who has those genes makes me a little bit nervous.
Okay, it's not going to be scary, I promise. And but it is nice. It's nice to have my mother remembered on this special night for me, because it is truly, truly a great honor to be a part of this community and to be taking on this big role. So to that end, we're going to have a conversation about some of the big problems and questions facing our community in what has been a very difficult year. And to begin, I think we should talk about what's happened in Toronto with vulnerable members of our community. One of the reasons why I enjoy being involved in Federation so much is you really get to see the whole community from top to bottom and end to end. And I remember 3 years ago when I was chair of the campaign with my friend Ilan Protzer, and UJA organized for us a tour of the social services. And one of the things that Ilan and I did was we participated in a delivery of kosher Meals on Wheels to clients, particularly in the buildings behind the Bernard Butel Center, where people are living there in public housing. And I went with a social worker, a Federation social worker who was Russian speaking, and we visited one of the clients who was living at that time in a very rudimentary housing. The cupboards in his apartment were open and empty. There was an unmade cot and a TV with Russian cable TV streaming into his apartment. And I just was overwhelmed by just how delicate this man's situation was. And that was 3 years ago, pre-COVID. And I have thought about him a lot ever since during this pandemic, because I know there's so many like him that are suffering, as much as they were suffering 3 years ago, so much more. And in the year that I've been sitting on the board as vice chair, I've watched you and your leadership team try and triage the needs of our community as we face this pandemic, and there are already such tremendous needs. So can you talk a little bit about how you've done that, how you have been able to prioritize the most vulnerable in this time?
Yeah, it's very much at the heart of what we're doing. You know, the pandemic has been incredibly difficult for everybody in the community, but the group who have faced the most challenging time are those 1 in 8 Jews who live below the poverty line prior to the pandemic. All of the hardship that you saw firsthand is exacerbated by the pandemic, because of course one of the things the pandemic is most brilliant at is identifying the weaknesses in society and really exploiting them. And so, you know, I was overwhelmed. Bernard Butel, the center that you described, delivers our kosher Meals on Wheels to low-income seniors like the person that you met. They have been overwhelmed by about 130% increase in demand. There are literally hundreds of elderly Jews in our community that we are struggling to meet the needs, who need food right now because they're in the impossible position of choosing between food and medication, for example. And we're committed to making sure that our agencies get the resources that they need to do it, because we have the most wonderful network of Jewish social service agencies. On top of it, though, there is another group that has emerged, a new group of newly vulnerable Jews. Don't forget that this pandemic started with 44% of all Canadians, including Jewish Canadians, either losing their jobs or having a serious reduction in the number of working hours. And the financial hardship on them has been extreme. And so what we've done, and I think this will be a big focus of where we go, we recognize for these newly vulnerable Jews, as well as all vulnerable Jews, that no one Jewish social service agency represents this panacea that if we could just get them to agency X, their issues would be solved. What we're doing is we're bringing together all of our Jewish social service agencies. So when these newly vulnerable Jews come to them, no matter which door they go in, they get the services of all of our Jewish social service agencies so that we can move people from a position of being vulnerable to stable as quickly as possible as a community. And that's where our focus really is going to be.
You and your team made the decision last year to launch an emergency campaign. How have you deployed those funds? How did the campaign go?
So the campaign is still underway. It is going really well. I am so overwhelmed by the response and the generosity of community leaders, who many of whom have stepped up in an extraordinary way, understanding that there are others in our community who aren't going to be able to step up. When we work with our agencies on what the exceptional need would be, we typically run an annual campaign of about $60 million. We identified that there's $25 million in additional need. Of that, we've doubled the amount that we're giving to the most vulnerable in our community and divided it into helping both those who were already living in poverty and needed additional services, as well as those who are newly vulnerable, to make sure that they're able to break this temporary, what we hope will be temporary, issue of poverty and difficulty that they're facing. So
you mentioned my mother, and it's actually a good segue for me, because I want to say that for someone stepping into this role as chair of the board, you know, we all have our inspirations and our role models, and for me, it's very much my mother's parents, Harold and Florence Rosberg, who serve as a great example to me. In addition, of course, I should say the example of my husband, who is, I think, one of the great community leaders Toronto has. But my grandparents lived in Niagara Falls, Ontario, and they were among the first Jewish settlers in that town. And because they were among the first, there was really no Jewish communal infrastructure when they got there. And they were successful merchants, and they were able to help people on an individual basis, the vulnerable and the needy, in the ways that you described. But they also took on a sense of responsibility for building up the communal infrastructure. And so my grandfather and his family were instrumental in creating a synagogue, the first synagogue and only synagogue in Niagara Falls. They did that in the 30s, and in the 50s they were able to make it grow, and so that it had a kosher kitchen for communal events, a Sunday school. And they also negotiated with the town to portion off a section of the Lundy's Lane Cemetery, which is a very important historic cemetery, but to make a Jewish section in that cemetery for Jewish burial. And this is all by way of saying that their lesson to me was that you had to take care of daily needs, but you also have to take care of the pillars of community. And I know that that also has been a tremendous focus of your time this year, in this time of crisis, preserving and protecting the pillars that make our community so strong, our schools, our camps, our Israel experiences. So can you just tell us a little bit about what you've done this year to help protect those institutions?
Sure. You know, the pandemic has had this clarifying effect. Before we faced the pandemic, we understood that there was a level of vulnerability in our community, particularly for middle-class Jews, who were starting to struggle to be able to afford to participate in our key community institutions, be they schools or camps or community centers. When the pandemic hurt that middle class economically, all of a sudden we understood that if that group withdraws from Jewish life, our community institutions, which rely on the program fees that they pay, would end up collapsing and disappearing. And it's that appreciation that your grandparents had of the importance of these institutions that led us to really focus on two things: the vulnerable, and making sure that nobody had to withdraw from Jewish life because they couldn't afford it as a result of the pandemic. It's had some unintended positive consequences. You know, we turned to our schools, for example, and said to them, finances aren't going to be a barrier for families this year. We are going to be there to make sure that nobody has to withdraw from the system because they can't afford it. As a result of that message to our schools and the high quality of the schools themselves, we find ourselves in a situation this year, for the first time in 17 years, we have 250 more students in our schools than we did at any time previous. For the last 17 years, the numbers have been in decline. It was very clarifying for us to see that there are many Jews in this community who want to participate in communal life, but for whom finances are a barrier. And so we are going to be very much committed to that issue, not just with schools, but with schools, with camps, with community centers, because one of the greatest assets this community has is the richness of Jewish institutional life, and we want to see everyone who wants to benefit from it benefit.
That's terrific. One last big area of focus is this, what we all feel is this growing and emerging, bubbling anti-Semitism around us. And while I think we all would agree that we're so privileged to live in Canada and it is one of the most tolerant, safest, kindest societies in the world, that we are not immune from this reemergence of anti-Semitism. And it's something that people are feeling on a daily basis, either when they go online or on campus. And I will say, you know, I have my own experience with it. I know probably everybody watching this has had their own experience with it. In my case, for the last couple of years, about 2 years ago, I started receiving some pretty vicious anti-Semitic hate mail to my office in Ottawa. And it was pretty hardcore, you know, like swastikas drenched in blood and, you know, death threats and that kind of thing. And what's interesting is that my instinct when it started coming in is my assistant would either tell me about it or show it to me, and I would say, just put it in the garbage. That's where it belongs. It is garbage. Throw it out. I don't want to know about it. Don't even show it to me. And I could see she didn't really approve of this approach, but she did. But they kept coming, these letters. And about 3 months ago, another one came in, and she said, you know what? Let's take it to the police. This is ridiculous. And I was like, nothing, you can take it to the police, but nothing will happen. You know, this is just part of our lives today. It's just how it is. And she's not Jewish. I don't know if I said that already, but she said, you know, no, I'm taking it to the police. So she did. And about a month ago, I got a call from the Toronto police, and they had found and arrested the guy who sent it. Now, he wasn't just sending it to me, but it was this particular piece of mail that allowed them to catch him, which I think was as simple as he put his return address on it or something. But you know, but the point is that he was there to be caught if you took the trouble, and that was the takeaway for me. Was, you know, my instincts about this were wrong. You don't just turn your back to it and throw it in the garbage and pretend it's not there. That's not the right thing to do. And you don't assume that nothing can change or nothing can be done, because that turned out to be wrong as well. Something was done, and this guy's going to go to jail. So with that all said, what is the community approach to attacking this growing problem, and what is Federation doing?
It's a really, really important part of our strategy moving forward. You know, unfortunately, the hate that you experienced is not limited just to public figures who happen to be Jewish. We commissioned, together with a number of federations, a study of Canadian Jews that was done by U of T and York. And I have to tell you, one of the most alarming findings in it was that young Jews, in particular, reported a very high rate of facing anti-Semitism. I suspect largely because they are more online than other segments of the community, and the online hate is particularly vicious. But my strong belief in how we tackle this is in a proactive fashion that doesn't just limit itself to one kind of strategy. And it's actually very similar to what we talked about in helping the vulnerable, that there is no one agency that can do it on their own. A very similar thing applies here. We have the most wonderful advocacy organization called the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. I know you know it well as a member of the Senate. And they look at advocating for the community at all three levels of government, and they do an outstanding job. But that in and of itself isn't enough anymore. We have our Neuberger Holocaust Education Center that is educating 10,000 plus young people on an annual basis about the lessons of what happens when hate runs amok. We have our security team that is looking at protecting the physical needs of Jewish institutions and making sure that we are interconnected with police, just like you turn to them, to make sure that our community is safe. And we're investing in Hillels on college and university campuses to make sure that Jewish and non-Jewish students are supported in making the case for why this kind of hate should not exist. It's the combination of all of those things together, focused, coordinated together, that we're going to really move the needle in countering anti-Semitism. That's why I believe so strongly in the magic of coming together as a community and taking a community-wide approach, because these challenges are not solvable one organization at a time. It really takes us coming together in order to be able to defeat them.
Well, Adam, I think you've given us a very good overview of the issues that we will be facing in the next upcoming year. I want to thank you so much for your tremendous leadership and for that of your whole team. One of the reasons why I'm so pleased to be taking on this role is because I get to work with you and the entire group at Federation, who I just have the highest opinion about, and I think that you serve us so well, and I want to thank you for that. I'm also really grateful that we have a tremendous board of directors. I'm thrilled that Jeffrey Rosenthal has agreed to come on as vice chair of the board, and I'm really appreciative of the leadership of our outgoing chair, Warren Kimmel, and our immediate past chair, Bruce Lieboff. These two men serve with such intense dedication, tireless commitment. They bring such energy, knowledge, expertise, brain power to the table. And I've learned so much from them, and I'm so grateful to them for their model. And I'm so grateful to everybody who's participating in this meeting, because everybody who's watching this is involved in Federation in some way and is contributing. And we owe them so much. We have the most incredible community. So I think with that, we will hand it back over to the official events. But it's been a delight speaking with you, and I so look forward to working with you over the next 2 years.
Me too. Thank you.